Okay, it is 6 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. October 9th, Addison Northwest School District Board of Directors meeting. Like to accept the motion to adopt the agenda.
So move.
Seconded.
Any discussion, additions, changes? I can't see everybody, okay. All right, all in favor of adopting as is?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Do we have any public communication tonight?
I love your name tags.
Thank you.
Thank Glory.
Thank Glory,
Yes,
yeah.
Glory made
Top
them.
Glory.
Thank you, Glory.
Good. Okay. I guess we're at board education. So did you want to introduce Beth?
Yeah, I would. Beth, I'm sure you're welcoming everybody this evening to Ferrisburg Central School. We've asked the principals to think of a presentation that highlights something really important that's going on in their buildings. So I think Beth has a very interesting one for you tonight, and welcome, Beth.
Well, good evening to all of you, and just a very quick housekeeping item, and that is that if anybody needs to use the restrooms, right outside the corridor to the right, there's 2 restrooms right there, so you'll be able to find them. And so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about tonight is PBIS at Ferrisburg. And I know we all throw a lot of those acronyms at you, so PBIS is actually Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And it is part of the multi-tiered support systems that we offer for our kiddos in all of our schools. And when we say multi-tiered, it's really a continuum. And we always talk about Tier 1. Tier 1 services are something that everybody gets. It's those things, whether it is academic or behavioral, it's something that we all do. Tier 2 is after you've gone through the EST process, you're kind of like, oh, we need to give this student more support. And so you're into Tier 2. Tier 3 is really once you get into you get into either a 504 plan or an IEP, and that is a federally mandated plan. So what are Tier 1 supports? Things like preferential seating. You know, if a kid's a little chatty in one spot, maybe ask them to move to another location. Giving them movement breaks. We do a lot of, go gym and things like that where they're getting up and they're moving around. Multiple points of access. Don't just tell them one thing, give them some other options. Like, I want to read it, I want to hear it, I might want to see a video about it. Give them multiple points of access for learning. And using a range of modalities, not just the printed word. And also having things like TOR, you'll hear that a lot. TOR is a time out room, meaning having a buddy room or some place where it's just getting a little bit like, I'm not ready to learn right now. You give them a break, you give them a spot to go to, and that's really something that we do for all of our kids. Tier 2 supports, that's after you've gone through the EST. That means teachers have noticed something's up and somebody's not being successful. And so we used to call those behavior plans, and if you've been in education for a while, you're like, oh yeah, the behavior plan. But it's adding services. It might add a counselor, a clinician, a school psychologist, something to do with the nurse. And then of course we have speech language pathologists, physical therapy, occupational therapy, out of school support, home visits, CSAC, things like that. There's this big range of supports that we need to offer certain kids because they're not being able to access their education on their own. And then of course Tier 3 is what happens with either IEP or 504, and that includes your special education, your paraeducators, one-to-one, and might include many of the other supports that we also mentioned. So what does this mean at FCS? Okay, in order to really have a PBIS team and program that is fully implemented, you need a team, you need a curriculum, you need fidelity. Protocols, plans, and bringing it back to your faculty and really having discussions about social emotional well-being of your kiddos. So let me show you a little bit about what that means here. We have a pretty multi-stakeholder team, and I'll tell you, I really was hoping that they would be presenting tonight, not I, because they are the ones that really do the meat and potatoes, the real work for this team. It's also being, a holiday today. A lot of them have kids, college kids, and it's their last night home, and I couldn't tear them away from that. We're also going to a PBIS conference tomorrow down in Killington, so it's going to be an early morning for some of the team members, so it's hard to pull them away for that. But we have a great team. We have classroom teachers, Kathy Podvar and Donna Rusick. We have social emotional learning, folks that represent social emotional learning, Sue Brillia, our counselor, Brianne Walsh, who is the school psychologist, and Gina Norman, who is our school home liaison. She's the clinician that works with us from CSAC. Stacy Valcour is special ed. Sarah Driscoll. We did, so much of what you get, what people hear about the social and emotional well-being of their students, paraprofessionals hear that. So to not have a paraprofessional sitting on this team would have been a pretty big omission on our part. So Sarah is part of the team, Allison Parsons, Unified Arts, and Administration. I represent the administration piece. We do have a pretty explicit set of behavioral expectations, and I didn't do 15 of these because I thought, oh my gosh, nobody really wants to read through the entire thing. But I can pass this around, and it just shows you all of the classroom teachers have this, and the students have worked through a curriculum that explicitly teaches these expectations, whether it's in the cafeteria or on the playground or on the, I wish we, actually, can we plug it in over there? Christine, can you plug in the stars? Do you see that? Is there a plug right over there? So you notice that yeah, so when we see students that are meeting these behavioral expectations, we give them a little star and we say, wow, you really were safe out on the playground today. Or the other day I was out on the playground and another student came by and there was a little kindergarten guy out there and there was a second grade boy and the second grade boy was walking away from basketball and he saw the kindergarten kid go over there and he's like, this kid's gonna be playing alone. He goes, do you want me to play with him? And the kid's face just lit up like it had made his day. And that's really, so later on, Kathy Pudvar happened to be out witnessing it, and she walked up and she goes, you were a real super citizen out there. And she gave him a star. Now you might think that sounds a little hokey, but I gotta tell you, it is powerful when, and we're talking elementary, I know middle and high school react to it a little bit differently. If you said, oh, what a super citizen you are, they might be like, oh. But elementary does. So one of the things that part of this curriculum, we wanted to make sure that it was actually being taught to students, not just sort of thrown up on a wall somewhere. And so we've included community building time. And it's a 15-minute block every day where kiddos can really develop a sense of community. It gives them sort of that togetherness, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. It gives kids a voice. Kids that might not say anything necessarily, they will say something during their community building time because it's a very safe location. It sets a tone for respectful class culture. I've got to tell you, we were in a faculty meeting last week talking about what are some of the things that you notice going on in your community building time. And Judy Ellison said, here's something I've really noticed. Since we've started doing this, when kids talk to one another, their eye contact has really improved. They're looking at one another. And, we respect, that's really right up there. And we structure it, and you can this is not like a hard and fast structure. We like the greeting part, the sharing a brief activity, or the sharing, they share out something about their life, and they do a little brief activity. And sometimes, it's not like every single day they're gonna go through those 3 steps. Maybe they'll take 10 minutes doing kind of a special fun greeting. Or maybe they'll just be like, a very quick, like, hot potato kind of greeting, and then spend more time on an activity or on sharing. One of the things a lot of the classes like to do on Mondays is they'll do diamonds and rust. And their diamond was something that like maybe really was cool that happened to them over the weekend, and their rust might be something that you know, they wished either hadn't happened or something that they would like to improve about their day, their weekend, their lives, whatever, you know, and it's really pretty powerful. And these guys, you know, will share things like, you know, my diamond is that I got to spend time with my friends, and my rust was that we might have to give our chicken away, you know, and that really was one of the ones that came through today. And so the eye contact, and they teach this. They don't just expect it's going to happen. They're really very prescriptive about this. And this is an example of the 5-6 class, and they circle up. And you know, one of the things when I was doing my research about high school advisory, one of the real markers for successful high school advisory was really that people circle up. You know, that they don't allow like a kid sitting over there and a kid sitting over there. They really ask them to, because you know, when you're in a circle, you can actually really look at each other. So that is kind of a special part of that. And of course, the celebrations. So once a star jar gets filled, so little Bobby out on the playground does a really nice thing. We commend him for being really safe. And when he comes in, he gets a star. Star goes into the star jar. Each classroom has a star jar. When the star jar gets filled, one of the light bulbs gets lit. And if you ever read the backpack, you'll see, you know, Miss Pierce's class filled their star jar this week. So then you can, when your class fills a star jar, you get a classroom celebration. And the concept is it should be a quick, maybe 20-minute celebration, but something that's, you know, just like, hey, we did it, good job. So this is Casey Pierce's class, where all these first graders got dressed into what were probably Halloween costumes of yore, and they danced around and had a dance party, and it was hilarious. But they had a great time doing it. When the F gets completely filled, we do a school-wide celebration. And so school-wide celebration might look like we had an outdoor sort of like winter fest. There were snow sculptures and dog sled races, being that 5th and 6th graders were the dogs and the kindergartners were in the sled. But you know, just, and the kids create the celebrations, you know, they really design the celebrations and they have a blast with it. The idea behind the celebrations, one of the most important pieces of PBIS is that it actually gives you more instructional time, not less instructional time. And one of the things that we noticed last year was that when people were doing their classroom celebrations, sometimes it was taking, you know, an hour or two, which means you're taking kids out of learning for an hour or two. So that's one of the reasons the team this year said, no, let's be really prescriptive about this and make sure that we limit our classroom celebrations to something, you know, 10 to 20 minutes, something that's fun and it's exciting. It gives them a reward, but it then brings them right back to learning. And then another piece of that is to make sure that when you're doing PBIS, to really do it with fidelity, that there are these protocols. We have things like and this, trust me, this is all the team, this wasn't me, because they came in and they worked over the summer. They created the little flip charts. We had already created the crisis plan and the evacuation plan and the office referrals. Those things we had already created. But then they came in and they put them all together, they linked them, they put one of these in everybody's room so that we know that everybody at the school is really using the same set of protocols for behavior. Another thing at the PBIS conference this summer, we all worked on flow charts. There's an attendance flow chart, a social emotional flow chart, and also we actually worked on an academic flow chart as well. So the teachers all reference these when they're thinking about, well, what should the next step be? They have something that there's this consistency across the board. And also their crisis commands. I mean, all of these things are right as you walk in their doors and you can grab them, and a substitute knows where they are. So there is that level of consistency, which I think is critical. And so does it work? So here's a little bit of research that talks about PBIS. There was a 2013 study that said classroom teachers with higher rates of general praise were found to report being more efficacious with regard to classroom management. I've got to tell you, one of the things that sold me on PBIS from the very beginning, walking into this building, was when one of the teachers said, you know, it's about saying 5 really good things to every sort of, you know, every correction you make for kids. And, you know, when you flip it that way, it's like, I'm going to see you doing great stuff. I'm not just going to see you when you whip a pencil at somebody. You know, I'm going to see you also, you know, pick that pencil up off the floor and hand it back to someone. You know, you're seeing the good stuff. And talk about a paradigm shift of how you look at your students. It's really, you know, pretty impressive. I can understand why that was found to be true. Other outcomes, fewer office referrals. We'll get to that in just a moment. Increased time for teaching. Remember, that was one of the goals, increased time for teaching. And there was a 2004 study that did find that if you use it with fidelity, you do get increased time for teaching. And some evidence around increased achievement. It was, you know, that was a little murkier. It was evidence, it was insignificant. So does it work at FCS? So these are we enter our behavioral data into a program called SWIS. It is a Vermont behavioral data program. So these are, and it's kind of funny, I'll go to conferences and they're like, oh, you know, I spend so much time logging stuff in for SWIS. We've had 7 office referrals since the beginning of school this year. I don't know anybody else who's had only 7. And I will tell you, like 3 of them were in the first week, and they were kindergartners that just really didn't know any better. 2 on the bus, 2 on the playground, 3 in class. That's our behavioral data. And you know, not to say that there aren't some things that kids do, but teachers realize that that's not a go to the office kind of thing. That's a, we need to do a little reteaching around our PBIS, around our curriculum about that. And it's really, you know, I've got to say, I think that we do have, you know, we have an amazing community. We have an amazing school and kids and faculty. We live in this beautiful county. But if I had to say the proof is in the pudding anywhere, I would have to say it's got to be in that kind of data. Questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.
Now,
Yeah, another presentation. Sorry, Mark.
It's okay, I just don't want my head in the way of the cameras.
Do I have my back to anyone? Just Matt. So this evening, I am going to present some district-wide assessment results from the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. So a little bit of history. We have been administering the SBAC since 2015. Tonight, I have data from 2 years. We do not have district-wide data from 2015 because we determined when the assessment results came in, there was a subset of kids from Addison and Ferrisburg, and those results were missing. So we could not do the comparison that year. I don't know what error that was. It turned out that the teachers administered the assessment somehow, because it's a computerized program, somehow the answers to those assessments did not get logged in. Beth, is there a way you could kind of move that over?
I can.
Thank you.
You want?
You don't have to show the number data. I'm more interested in the graphs. Thanks. Perfect. Good. So one of the things that we'd like to start with is that we really believe in order to look at assessment results, we need to be thinking about it as a growth model instead of third grade from one year and third grade to another year. It really has to be third grade to fourth grade, so you're looking at the same number of kids. The reason that we've done this is that when you look at the results third grade to third grade, it's a different demographic. That means that what makes up that group could have more or less IEP students. They have a variety of disabilities. The N could look very differently, and so comparing those don't make sense. What we do use when we look at grade levels is that administrators look at what are the items on the test that we seem to be not scoring well with, so it becomes a curriculum analysis piece. So let's look at the very top. So another piece I'd like you to keep in mind is that in order to make a piece of data significant, it has to be 5 points or more different. So what you're looking at is the blue column are the results from 2016, the red column is 2017, and then the orange column are the state results. So in the area of English language arts, you can see that there was a 28-point difference between 2016 and, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page, sorry about that. Hold on. What? Hang on. Sorry. This is literacy. So from third to fourth grade, there was a 16-point difference between the results from 2016 to 17, which is significant. So you could see that that group of kids did make some gains, and that the results, at least in 2017, was above the state average. When we look at the results from fourth to fifth grade, we're going to say that that's pretty even. There was about a 5-point difference there. It's not statistically significant. Looking at the results from fifth to sixth grade, that was a 6-point difference. So there was a slight significant difference there. And looking at the results from seventh to eighth grade, that was a 2-point difference. And so we're not seeing that as significant. In all cases, you can see that the results in third to fourth, fourth to fifth were above state average. Fifth to sixth was above state average. I would say that seventh to eighth is more in line with state average. And then when you get to the seventh to eighth grade, the state average was higher than how our students performed. Can we go down 2, please?
So keep going.
Keep going. So the next section, next section is mathematics, right?
Could you go down a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
thank you.
thanks.
Good. So this is a district growth model in mathematics. Thank you. So there's a 28. No, it's not true. It's on the other page. So there's a 4-point difference between the third to fourth grade in the SBAC mathematics, which is not significant. In looking at fourth to fifth, there was a 28-point difference, which is significant. Both were, the third to fourth grade was above the state average, and you can see that we took a dip when comparing fourth to fifth. It was below the state average in the 2017 cohort. Looking over to sixth to seventh, that was a 7-point difference. So again, the results showed some level of increase and also over the state average. And then seventh to eighth grade is a 10-point difference. Both of those are below the state average. Looking to the next frame, it's the same argument there. That's the same cohort. We're not reporting those results. We look at the individual item analysis, but we don't use it for comparison and a lens for growth. So the last frame I'd like to point your attention to is comparing literacy to mathematics. So across the board, with the exception of fourth and sixth grade, you could see that literacy is higher or slightly higher than our math scores. The fourth and fifth grade are not statistically significant, so we're saying they're pretty much in line. You see quite a difference in eighth grade and a slight uptick in the 11th grade. So the last part of the presentation is what do we do about it? Well, the first thing that we do is that we're analyzing our teachers' schedules to make sure that there's equity for learning opportunities across the board. So the standard of practice that we use right now is that in all of our K to 6 classrooms, we ask teachers to schedule 90 minutes of literacy, either in a block or throughout the day to provide a high-quality instruction. In the area of mathematics, in grade 4, K to 4, it should be 75 minutes of mathematics, and in grades 5 and 6, it's 60 minutes of mathematics. And the high school obviously is a different schedule, and all of those courses run very similarly. The next thing we take a look at are instructional practices. We take a look at what programs are being offered. Are they consistent across the district? What are the programs that are making the most difference in terms of instructional growth? And we're going to try to make that consistent throughout all of the grades in our system. And then last, and it's in the school action plans, we will be identifying 6 critical proficiencies for every content area this year, so that we can say, okay, where do these proficiencies line up to our assessments? How do they line up to the way that we report out to parents on the report cards? And what do we need to do to beef up our curriculum to make sure that those proficiencies are aligned? So when you talk about resources, one of the pieces that was new in our budget this year was the concept of a math coach. We have literacy coaches, we don't have a math coach. So we're hoping that that math coach will be working both with classroom teachers as well as the interventionists so that we can make some improvements in that area. So I'm going to stop this level of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I have the principals here too that can answer questions related to their schools. George?
It appears that there's a problem in the 8th grade. Is this something that has followed that group as they advanced, or is it just all of a sudden they hit a wall?
You know, it's interesting, that class, I'll give you, if you look at the last, I can't tell, it's the one that's blue and red, that has the literacy to math comparisons by grade.
Right there.
So, is that blue and red?
Yeah.
So that's this year's 9th grade and this year's 8th grade. This year's 9th grade has 93 students in it. This year's 8th grade has 66 students in it. So it's larger by almost 30 students. So that's one of the items, that's why we can't compare cohorts, because that cohort of students has been a large class going through our system. So if you only have 66 kids spread across 3 elementary schools, it stands to reason those were very small classes, probably more support. I'm guessing, and we're thinking about this. The 8th grade has 93 students in it. They came in with even more. That's also a grade that has a higher level of plans, and so the students are needier. When I did my report last year, if you remember, those of you who were on the VUHS board, it lasted about 45 minutes, which is why Joanne, I think, said I didn't need to do one this year. I did a comparison of free and reduced lunch and scores, and the cohorts changed dramatically. So when I did my data last year, and it was these 2 classes, we had almost like 44, 45% free and reduced lunch in one group, and much closer to 25 or 30% in the other group. So it would be so simple to say, yeah, it's a problem with 8th grade instruction, but the cores are different too. So those students are on different cores, so a different team. So there's so many factors involved. We haven't been giving this test long enough with reliable data to figure it out. But the standards, the 8th grade math standards in particular, change dramatically. They become much more rigorous at that point, and Nancy's nodding her head. So 7th grade standards are, so we see a dip in math always because the standards become more challenging. It's pre-algebra, and we generally don't address that until integrated, which is a high school course, and that's the same thing with the 11th grade. Now, the 11th grade Common Core assumes that you've had the equivalent of integrated 1, geometry, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. And because we use the integrated math program, which Common Core will also tell you is a more effective method of instruction, because it's all the math disciplines and it spirals along. But to hit all the content that they test in the 11th grade, you have to get all the way through integrated 4. And very few of our students actually get that far. So it's really complicated is the short story here.
Finn?
Yeah.
So along a similar line, if you don't mind somebody scrolling back up a little bit to one of the ones that shows longitudinal data last year to this year, where the grades are combined. Yeah, so
In mathematics or English language arts?
both actually, they both visually adhere to sort of like a downward trend as we go up in age. And depending on how you look on that's either a downward trend or an upward trend, since we're moving kind of back in time. Looking at it here, it appears to be a downward trend, both in math and also in writing or in literacy. It does the same thing. And I don't imagine that we've run any statistical tests on that to see if that's significant or not. But
We actually have. The difference is, I said if it was 5 points, if it was more than 5 points, the difference, it is significant.
Right. So what I'm talking about is the not the difference between
Those
these
two,
bars, but the general
I see.
downward movement,
Yeah.
which is both here and also with literacy.
we have not done that.
Do we have any insight about what might be happening there, or if that's significant?
I can tell you in the area of mathematics that we've been concerned about the curriculum that we're using in grades 5 and 6. Is Go Math also used in 7, 8, Nancy? Yes. And so we're questioning whether that is the best program to support the Common Core standards and also our proficiency work. So that conversation is going to happen after we've identified the proficiencies. But that's one area. I don't know if you wanted to make an additional observation about
Well, I would
that.
say, have you sampled the test? The tests are available for you to sample, to go through. So you could pick the 8th grade assessment in either area and do it. This is not your mother's test.
I've taken it.
It very, very challenging questions, and it asks students to test in a format that we don't generally use. So so they're on a computer screen and they're looking at 2 separate documents side by side, which is difficult to do with regular software, I gotta tell you, and it's asking them to read, highlight using electronic means, and then type in, so it's a lot of on-demand writing, but in a format that's a little bit out of what they're used to doing. It's also difficult to recreate at the classroom level.
So am I hearing that it's more a question of students being unfamiliar with the testing protocol than it is with actual assessment?
Well, there's a certain degree, they talk about working memory, and if you're applying a lot of your working memory to just figuring out how this works, you're not able to actually apply it to what you're being asked to do.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that, but now these kids have been tested that way. But when you get to the height, basically the 8th grade assessment becomes much more challenging. At the elementary level, it's easier to test students. I mean, and the questions themselves are more familiar with what they're asked to do at the classroom level than when they get up to the higher level tests. So it sounds like I'm being defensive, but it's an interesting quandary. How do you teach the test in order to give your students an opportunity to do well when the test itself is difficult? It's a platform.
I think there's Christina first, and then we'll move on that
Well, I
direction.
was just wondering, this is one assessment tool that we're using, so are there others, and does that data point to a different kind of trend, or?
Yes, we're in the 2nd year of our comprehensive assessment plan. We're not finished in the development phase, but yes, we have other assessments. And when we talk about the concept of growth, that's a really important concept to apply whatever we're doing. Right now, the MTSS teams in each of the schools are looking at growth and determining what needs to happen at Tier 1, what needs to happen at Tier 2, and then what needs to happen at Tier 3. We hope to get to a point where we're looking at multiple points of data, not just one. I know the in the news, there's a lot of poo-pooing of the SBAC. But the SBAC is not going away. Judgments are being made about our kids and our schools based on the SBAC. So we are looking at this seriously. We are going to do better over time, and for a lot of the reasons that were just stated. But it's not the only piece of data that we'd like to bring forward.
I mean, do you have existing data that's pointing to that?
I don't have that in front of me, but I'm going to guess to say, principals, are they showing different results?
I mean, for me, the fast testing that we do is more indicative of the questions that we ask, as in the second looks are as well. So we use, at the elementary level, we use a test called FAST. It's a formative assessment system for teachers, and then depending on how kids do on that, and it ranks them based on a number of factors, but it's more akin, and we've looked at it to what's transpiring in the classroom than SBAC. And then those second looks for kids who we recognize as might need a deeper look at that. We do different assessments based on what it is. So for, early elementary kids who might have more challenges in mathematics, we'll give them the PNOA, which is the Primary Numbers and Operations Assessment, which was designed by someone in the state of Vermont. So if you're familiar with that, you're familiar with it. If you're not, I'm not going to explain it. But it gives us a lot of more specific data on what the kids can and cannot do mathematically. We have F&Ps, the Fontes and Pinnell assessment that we use with kids in reading. We do phonological assessments.
Writing prompts.
We have the writing prompt next week. Interestingly, the writing prompt was developed locally, so we tried to, in some ways, replicate the expectation that kids might see on the SBAC without making it SBAC-y. So we're trying to offer those opportunities to generate data and generate opportunities for learning that are more aligned with what we want to see. So we use the district writing committee to do that, and we're using some of our professional development time to co-score those so that we have a better understanding across the board of what our expectations are aligned with the Common Core. So those local assessments that we do, in my professional opinion, are as valuable or more valuable than the SBAC results. The SBAC results, they change the test from time to time. I know we don't have results from 3 years ago, but the test is different from 3 years ago than it was 2 years ago. So it's hard. We don't want to prep the kids for the test and then have the test
Be different.
changed.
Yeah. Sue and then George.
I'm
I'm sorry.
just gonna add
You wanna
something.
add?
I mean, what's nice too is it's 3 times a year that we are able to do this assessment as well. So we have the fall, winter, and the spring. And so we have a kind of a well-rounded look at the student, the child, and where they're progressing. And like Matt was saying, all the different assessments, the first and second looks. So we have a lot of ways to look at that. And I think that's very supportive and helpful for me as a principal and as teachers too, to be able to look at that data and then make those corrections or ways to support those students throughout the year and not just, one piece of that data. Yeah.
Thanks, Travis. Sue and then George.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm all set.
You said that the test is different than what they're experiencing before. And it isn't something that you're able to teach in the classroom because you don't have that type of software. You were also talking about the possibility of changing to a different math instructional program. Is there one that would be an improvement and also might move more toward what the test is looking at so that they'd be more familiar? I agree, it's a very difficult thing to walk in to take a test when the test is formatted different than the instruction that you've had.
Well, there are two parts to that, George. First, there are practice tests. I think the comment that was made is that we may get our kids on to do the practice test, but then by the time they take the real test, they're going to change the format. So that's a little bit of a moving target. The selection of a program that matches up. I would prefer to get a selection of program that matches up with what we think is the most important learning we want our kids to do, which is the proficiency work that will be aligned to the Common Core. That's going to be our big challenge. And then we can use these assessments, to look at growth over time, but really to do more item analysis. What are the big items that our kids are not doing well on, and why is that? Is it because of content? Is it because of approach, what we're asking them to do? kids are becoming more familiar with taking assessments online. And some of the assessments that Matt mentioned are also given online. So I think we're going to get there. We're just still very new in the administration process, and it, you know, and it has had an impact.
Thank you.
Tom?
I have two questions, one of which is, I think, fairly straightforward, and the other of which is a little bit vaguer, so I apologize in advance for my vagueness. The first, you pointed out that we've only got 2 years of this, and so we really can't test, we can't really, it doesn't make sense to talk about third grade over time. What is, which totally makes sense to me, but what is statistically significant? When can we look to see, there's a real problem with the third grade or the sixth grade or whenever, is that
3,
4 years?
more than 2.
Well, I'm assuming there's a best practices answer to this as opposed to, I mean, that.
Somewhere between 3 and 1,000.
Okay. My vaguer question is, wondering if you could help us to know what we as the board should actually be tracking. Because I'm a little bit, I mean, these are, you know, these are numbers and graphs and it tells us something, but I'm not sure what I should be paying attention to.
I think you should be paying attention to growth and holding us accountable that every student benefits from the educational program that we provide them. And so we should be seeing from one year to the next, these groups of students as a group making progress. And it may be that they're making progress by the results staying the same. A deeper analysis would give us the backstory. But I want you to keep me accountable not just for being better than the state, but that all of our kids over time are making the progress they need to get closer to proficient and proficient with distinction or exceeds. Chris?
Is there a way to see that, like you said, like if you had a cohort of kids in third grade and how they did to the next year and see if they, you know, what do you want to call it? How many or what % of them actually did better or made a goal of some kind of growth versus the okay.
That's the first.
So the number that you gave us is that was that change is was either the growth or the lack of growth in that. Okay, got it.
Yes, Diana.
So you were talking about finding 6 proficiencies for every subject area. Will there be crossover in that? So let's say it was writing, but you also have writing in social studies and you have writing in science. And will there be some, I'm just thinking about 6 proficiencies for elementary school teachers who teach everything.
Right.
That's like 48 proficiencies.
Right. I don't know if any of the principals want to answer that question. I'm sure there'll be some level of overlap. We are actually going to get some training from someone who's going to help us oversee the development of proficiency work. Stephanie's school is really very much further ahead of what we're doing with K-6.
Would I say, you know, the SBAC can test on all the standards for a particular grade. That's what they do. So, and those that perhaps came before. So we know we can't address all of them. We could probably target all of them, but to teach them deeply and with true understanding and mastery is impossible. So I tell my teachers that, you know, we're going to identify the standards that we're going to teach to from among the Common Core standards and the C3 social studies standards and the NGSS science standards. And your goal is to make sure that students learn that content deeply and with true understanding and application across other areas. And it may be that we're not addressing a particular area that's addressed in the Common Core, but the mastery that they show, the proficiency that they show in the areas that they do test in should overcome those deficiencies. Because you know, in 176 days, in 1 year, you can't teach it all. We know that, and it ends up being sort of a spray method where we're just, you know, well, I taught that, but did they learn it? And we want to make sure kids are learning that.
So that's why
you're
we're
talking like power standards then?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Kind of like that idea, but that's why we are teaching both transferable skills, which is, you know, more of those application to life versus content. We've been struggling forever around content, you know that. We don't have enough time to teach every single piece. But I think some of what Stephanie was talking about will make some connections through our K-12 system, so that it's deeper learning that the students will display. Travis?
I was just gonna say, I mean, definitely there probably will be some crossover, but as a teacher myself and as a principal administrator, it's always nice to have that focus and that goal, that end goal, if you want to say that, just to where we want to go and where we want our students to be. And so I think that really helps us help our students, if that makes sense. Because we're wanting to obviously support them in all curriculum areas, and as teachers, if we have those proficiencies, that helps us focus where we need to go and how we can help our students. But it's that personalized learning approach too. So that's going to be something where we look at it for each child, where they are, and how we can help them grow.
Thanks. Any other questions from the board?
Thank you very much. It's really good to see. It'll be nice to see even more in the 2 years.
Are we done with the agenda?
We are. Thank you, Beth.
All right. So, we are at board and committee reports.
I'm sorry, I just asked if this information could actually be sent to us.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. So superintendent's report.
Yes. So before I open it up for any questions based on my report, I did want to address some recent activity at the Virgins High School this past week. Want you to know that there's been a lot of time and attention played for not just reacting to the situation, but really examining some things that we need to correct. I think that it was unfortunate that there were some details that were not accurate on the television media. And we've tried to be as clear as we possibly can so that we are giving the most accurate information to the community. Basically, we determined that our safety protocols were not being followed. It had to do with propping open a door. Unfortunately, that happens probably too many times. And an incident happened as it relates to that, and so we are correcting that. That is not going to happen any longer. Stephanie and Ken and and we also had a debriefing with George Merkel. I think that we need more conversation about some changes, but one of the changes we're considering is changing some locks. We haven't made final decisions, but we're considering whether any alarm system would help with that. There are some challenges with the alarm system that we need to consider. But we need to be vigilant, vigilant at the front desk. We need to be vigilant with our visitor lanterns. We need to be vigilant monitoring and making sure that the custodial staff, teaching staff, student population all understands how important it is not to prop up doors. I will say that I feel we're very lucky that nothing worse happened. That is not to diminish what happened on that day. But I do want you to know that we've taken it very seriously. And I know that Stephanie and I have spent a lot of time over the weekend and during the course of the last couple of business days addressing the issue. I've personally spoken to at least a dozen parents. I'm going to encourage you that if you do speak to parents in the community and they want to get something off their shoulders, please encourage them to call Stephanie or myself. I'd rather speak to them than email, because I think this is the kind of situation that you really need to have direct contact. Steph, did you want to add anything?
So just a quick question. Do I understand correctly that if the current safety protocol had been followed properly, there would have been no incident?
We do not believe that the incident was that somebody got into a prop door. No.
Right.
If we followed our safety protocol, that probably would not have
So
happened.
just to keep it in perspective in terms of the depth of soul searching and resources that may need to be dedicated to this, it seems as though, in my assessment, reaffirming what the existing protocol is and making sure that it's followed may in fact be a sufficient response.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So on Friday, I submitted to the board an addition to my report, my incidental report. I just want to point out what that change of information looks like. I'd been asked over a couple of over the last month to provide the board with some concussion data. And I got to tell you, what I learned is trying to chase this information was not easy. Some of our nursing staff are putting medical information into Power School, which is our student management program. Others are keeping a notebook and doing it manually. And so it really highlighted for me some need to have some common processes and procedures in place so that we can get information more readily. I will also say that I don't believe we follow the same protocol across the district. I've asked Lynn to pull together the nurses so that we can look at policies and procedures and to get some consistency in areas like concussions, and then to work with them to also define what we want in terms of a written model for running a school health program. So that is in the works this year. We were able to get some data from the athletic trainer at the high school. That was probably the best way to go, but this law has only been in practice since 2014, so we don't have a lot of longitudinal information, and trying to collect it, as I mentioned earlier, would be very difficult. One of the other things that I learned is that a nurse cannot diagnose a concussion. Only a doctor can diagnose a concussion. And often when there's an incident in school, if the kids show any symptoms of concussions, the nurses will treat it like it is a concussion. Just so that you know, we go above and beyond to make sure that we're following at least some protocol that we can defend. I also learned that in some cases, it's not the result of sports. It's the result of playground or things that happen in the community or at home. Our kids are involved in many, many different activities like horseback riding. They could just be horsing around at school, at home with a brother and get a head injury.
Or a sister.
Or a sister. So, and, I also was not able to disaggregate, the double counting of the number of incidences that the school nurse at the high school had versus the athletic trainer. Some of those they overlap and they're the same. Pete Manine is going to be joining us next month to talk about our grade 3 through 12 athletic program and the ideas that we have around that. I'm sure that he'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. In the meantime, if you do have questions, it always helps us to prepare by forwarding those questions to me. And I'm happy to elaborate on anything I've just said.
Thank you. Oh, George, yes. Go ahead.
So, I understand the problem that you have in getting district-wide data. It sounds like it's gonna really take a lot of digging, but you're standardizing the protocol is gonna help with that. But I'm really, really concerned that the best data that we think we've got is from the athletic trainer, and there are 25 incidents of concussions last year. I think that's totally unacceptable. And I don't know what needs to be done to bring that under control, but it's a very serious thing. You know that I've been talking about concussions because of this bit with the NFL. Now that data is very skewed. The only way to determine the brain deterioration caused by these injuries is through an autopsy. And the only people whose brains were autopsied were players who were experiencing symptoms. So it's not surprising that 99% of the brains that were autopsied showed a deterioration caused by this type of injury. But I think that it shows that there's no question but what this type of injury can cause a very serious brain problem. And these kids leave home in the morning and come into our care, and we're supposed to not only educate them, but to take care of them while we have them in our classrooms. To that end, I really seriously think that we need to take a long, hard look at any sport that comes into a physical contact.
So just to respond to that, I've got one of my sons plays soccer,
Mhm.
and on the JV team, and he's been in the concussion protocol 3 times in the last 2 years. I don't have a medical degree, but the one time that he was, that I'm fairly certain he had a concussion was as a result of a football incident where it was an elbow, not a tackle. It was it was during Spark. It was just one of those, do we all know what Spark is? Sorry, Spark is
Outdoor recess.
recess for high school kids. When he and he was on the concussion protocol last week because he headed a ball improperly, and he didn't display any symptoms after having a headache for about a minute and a half, but he took himself out of the game and he got onto a 5-day protocol because the athletic system here is actually very, very attentive to these problems. So I don't want my kid to get CTE, but I think my experience of this is that the athletic program is very attentive to this. They're attentive to state law. I've been coaching soccer for the last 8 years, and in the last 3 years at the elementary school, in the last 3 years, I've gotten a lot. I've had to go through concussion training things. I've gotten a lot of information about it. It's not perfect, but most doctors will tell you, from what I've said, that they often don't know, right? So there's a lot of erring on the side of safety and labeling it so that there's not the multiple hits, because it's the multiple hits without the brain recovering that becomes the problem. So I'm totally on board with being safe and making sure that our kids are safe, but I think my impression is that the program, unless we get rid of everything, and I'm not in any way suggesting that we get rid of having kids walk down the hallway or anything like that, that the school is taking it very seriously, and the district's taking it very seriously.
So are you suggesting that the 25 incidents may not have all been full-blown concussions? Probably were not.
If my son's was one of well, actually last year, if these were last year's data, my son had 2 of those, and one was a cleat to the face, and he went out, and I can show you pictures. They're great pictures. He got put on the concussion protocol because, what I was told by the trainer, and the trainer was doing her job, was that he was displaying a symptom of having a concussion because he was emotional. He'd been playing in a soccer game for an hour and a half. He'd just gotten cleated in the face. And
Were they winning or not?
And he tends to be a little bit emotional, so he was low blood sugared and dehydrated. Yep. Maybe he had a concussion, but they pulled him out, and they should have pulled him out, and he had a really big thing in his face. And so I totally agree with the decision that was made, but I don't think that was a subconcussive hit. Well, that's a subconcussive hit, and
So any one symptom on that list that I gave you, the athletic trainers, the coaches, the teachers assume that there's a concussion and treat the student as such.
And then how many students, 25 students out of 200 students, and then what is that percentage, and how does that compare to what's going on?
Exactly.
There's a sort of a parallel to our prior discussion about achievement assessments in that we're dealing with an underlying condition that we're trying to make continual incremental improvements on, and we're also dealing with the nature of the data collection and what we label as a concussion for preventative purposes, having improved over prior years. Mm-hmm. Basically, we would call something a concussion now that would never be called a concussion in the scenario that led to this NFL players being diagnosed with a serious disease, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things we might want to for not arguing though is 25 are the same kids, and in what time frame are they being put on the list? So if it's 25 individual kids over the course of the year, that's one thing. If there's 7 kids that got hit 3
Multiple
times
times,
each
yeah,
within a
right.
month, it's a whole different thing.
But that's really individual students' medical information.
Not that we need to know, but somebody should be watching where these numbers are coming from, so.
I mean, I think from an athletic trainer, they do, in the high school level anyway, if you've got a kid that's been hurt 2 or 3 times in one season, they're probably gonna not be playing.
Are trainers and nurses allowed to coordinate with each other per HIPAA, or are they not allowed to share information?
Well, they're both employees of the district, the athletic trainer and the school nurses, so yes,
So are they allowed
do.
to talk to one another
Yes.
and, okay.
So I have a comment and a question. So the comment is, I hope the next time you report, you feel like it's easier to collect the data. I think that's something that you should work on. And I also wonder, when you expect to report on this again? I mean, it's not one that we require, but when might we expect another report of this nature? Is this gonna be a yearly thing? I mean, annually, or?
I'm not thinking there's anything in your policy about an annual
I don't
report, but
remember
that,
anything.
if the full board wants to make that request,
Okay, well, okay.
it might fit under health and wellness, would it? It might
it's
fit
in
under
there.
health, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it seems
So
like we
I-
might want to
I
compare.
I'd like Lynn to take the comments, and then we'll have, we'll have a brief meeting before we meet with the nurses, which is next week, right? Okay.
So, can we move on, or is there another thing about concussions?
I just,
Anyone else?
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
just one other question. You said that the athletic trainer is going to cover some of this in his report next month?
Athletic director.
Yeah.
He may, if you have specific questions, Pete could be available to answer those questions or bring the athletic trainer with him. But really, his presentation is about what our plan is to bring under the umbrella of an athletic director our grades 3 through 12 athletic program.
Okay. Maybe you might ask him if he has the data, if he could give us a little bit of an insight on this, whether this is 25 separate people or whether it's repeats. And I agree with John. I think that at least an annual report on this should be. But we can't do action items here.
We cannot.
That's right, we cannot.
Something to think about for the-
It seems like it would make a really valuable component of the health and wellness report.
Yeah.
That seems appropriate to me.
Maybe you could put it on the agenda for next.
Well, I think if we have a consensus that people would like this included in the health and wellness report, then that could be a recommendation from the board.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have that consensus?
Great. And then one more piece I'd like to highlight in my report that I included. The superintendent will be out of town the last week in October to November 3rd. And in my absence, there'll be other central office people available to answer any questions. I will not be getting email, but I will not be getting phone calls, but I will check my email on a regular basis.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Oh, I did have one more question about the concussion. Right, there was one protocol that was from VU, from the Virgins.
Elementary.
I'm just assuming that you took one sample and that the other schools have.
They don't have the same protocol as what I learned, and part of the work that Lynn is going to be doing with our school nurses is to systematize it.
Okay.
Which will also make data collection easier, right?
Right, okay. I just have a quick question about your professional development report outs. This is good. We made policies and now we're getting procedures. That's a good thing. I think we should be happy about that. And I understand what's happening here. I don't know the professional development system enough. I know there are others who do. But I'm wondering where this is going to show up so that we can find this again. Or is this something, I'm making a request that this kind of procedure shows up on our website somewhere and that we think about below the policies, procedures that apply to them, or something like that, and just something to think
Right.
about.
So as we
that-
move through this year, making procedures that go along with the policies, where will they live? Will there,
These are administrative. I see these as my work with the staff, so I wouldn't think about putting this with policy, but if that is a request of yours, I think there are some that, that make sense, but others might not make sense.
Yeah.
Because it's not something we want to
Yeah.
report out in a general way.
right, but is there one spot where they all
Well,
are filed? Is there
there will
a
be
binder? Is
yeah,
there-
like an administrative procedure, just like your policy book is. You have to do this in here.
Keep going on and on.
Just copy and
You have to
paste it
walk
also
backwards
on the
and go back on.
homepage
It's-
somewhere.
it's like-
I mean, if you'll just think about where these
I'd like to
live
think
and that
about it.
we, so we
Yeah.
know where they live.
Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Are
Can
you
I-
talking about the continuous improvement plan?
I'm talking about
No,
the professional
professional
development,
development.
D21.
Procedures for implementing
Procedures for
district's
implementing
professional
that?
development policy.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about that while we're there too? I'm just curious if this was last updated recently in September, so is this currently happening? Is this
This-
new procedures that are gonna be starting? Or this is a
Some
write-up
of
of?
some of the details of timelines are new, but generally, this is how we collect information for professional development schedule.
Okay. And these are the steps taken, the needs assessment?
Correct.
Tied to the continuous plan, professional development committee? Okay, all right, thank you.
It's actually a requirement of our consolidated federal program grant.
All right. Other questions from the superintendent's incidental report?
Robust report.
It was very, very full, yes.
I had a question. So under the hiring process?
Yes.
For the curriculum director, this is for the interim one? Okay, thanks.
And I have a quick question. I just wanted to verify, did the audit start today?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
How's it going so far?
All day. They were very busy, and so were we. Yep,
The,
that's good.
sorry. The budget development calendar, are these dates set, these dates in January, or are these the dates?
These are the dates we're recommending. I'm more concerned about the number of times that we meet. If you want to change the dates, that's fine.
Okay,
And to really keep it like give us a week to make any changes from meeting to meeting.
okay, because I noticed these are mostly Wednesdays and
Yes.
one Thursday?
Yep.
Okay. So maybe if the board members can check these dates on this budget development calendar with your calendars and send some feedback about, because we will need a quorum at all of these. That's a request for everyone.
This is not just the budget committee, this is, over there's no
No,
budget.
that's all of
committee.
us.
This is everyone, yep.
We are the budget
Yep.
committee.
And in November, so for November, it just says November, so I'm assuming that's, or no, November 13th. ANWSD provides administration with budget guidance.
Correct.
So what would we expect? Will you be bringing anything at that
Yes.
point? Or?
So remember when I've done previous budget guidance presentations to each of the boards? You know, I've asked you to let us know, do you think we need to be thinking about keeping the tax rate to a minimum? Are you concerned about the % increase in expenditures? Are you concerned about expenditures minus revenues? What are the things that, obviously, you're going to be concerned that we align the vision to our financial resources? That would be a given. But just some financial parameters around that piece.
Joanne, will our audit be done by then? November 13th?
Not by November, no.
It won't be done. I think
But you'll have
may be
some-
close to a draft, or you may have some idea of where we're finishing the year
Yep.
from last year.
Speaking of which, on the last page after the loans, it says if the district can find funds in the current year to pay these off. Can we? I mean, I don't know what to ask there. I mean, it's a,
So which page you on?
I
John?
don't, this is,
It's the
Just start
there's a,
looking,
there's a
John.
set of loans.
Right, there's a couple of loans that are old and existing, and what happens is each year they're borrowing, they're borrowing short-term each year to year, and they're kind of refunding those loans. So
Okay.
the problem with that is you're never really paying them down, and you're just gaining interest every time, so the loan is actually getting bigger if you keep doing that. And I don't know how many years that's been going on, but I can see that it definitely happened last year. So my theory is just, if we can find available funds, we should pay down those as much as we possibly can instead of keeping them refunding every single year. So with that said, if we look at the current financials and things like that, there are some areas where we have some over budget situations that we have to figure out already. And then there's some areas where we're going to be under budget, or we're thinking that we are going to be. So we have to kind of evaluate all of those situations before we can really decide, do we have enough to pay the whole thing off? Do we have enough to pay, a more substantial payment than we have in the past?
It's not all or nothing, right? We could
It's
make
not
a-
all or nothing, absolutely not. Because you can definitely refinance them and refund them, but I would just recommend that we definitely don't refund them for the entire amount that they're existing right now.
And aren't they combined about $70,000?
Yes, they're about, $35,000 apiece. It's two different old capital improvement loans.
So I'm confused about the Virginia High School. It says the series 2010-4 bond, the principal payment, are we paying $415,000 a year on that?
Plus
Holy
interest.
Yes,
Plus interest.
It's a big bond.
Yep,
That
and then
is
you've got the
big.
second one that's 140,000.
Right.
Yep.
Are those some of the ones that are getting refunded? Is that one of the ones?
No.
that's-
Those are not, no, those are just regular bonds, and you
For
can
up
see
and
when
down
they
interest.
actually have a final payment due. I gave the dates on there also,
Okay.
that's like the last payment.
That big one doesn't seem endless.
No,
No.
it's 2020, is when that's not too far away.
That's
You're
a
almost
lot of
there.
money.
Just about enough time for another major system to fail, right?
Pretty much. Elizabeth, can I ask you a couple questions? Or-
Before we shift over, I have another.
Another one for Joanne? Sure, yeah.
So I just wanted to bring up the volunteer
Okay.
issue. We had a lot of challenges with the volunteers, getting everybody fingerprinted and I know you referred to kind of some shifts, but I'm wondering if this was a one-off kind of a problem, or if this is gonna happen every year?
It was a
or-
big year because we moved to an SD. It was like having to do the same for all of our staff. So I don't expect the volume, because I think these expire in 3 years, right? You get your background check and it's a 3-year process. So
If you stay involved, I think it continues on.
you're right. If you stay involved, you can stretch that out for a longer period of time. It's for the people who break service as volunteers. We'll have to do it more frequently.
But it is something along the lines of input for the budget. Do we want to consider creating a line item to help fund?
Well, I mean, I guess the question is how much, if it's, how big is the issue? I mean, this year it was fairly substantial, and maybe a request could be made of the police department to be more available, or to, make Waltham and Panton residents not pay as well because they're, but I mean, I don't know, maybe they're.
So when we knew we were doing this in volume, I met with Mel Hawley and also George Merkel, and we did put together a system by which we made it as convenient as possible for our teachers.
Sure.
And then later on, over the summer, we started signing up volunteers. So they went back to their old schedule. They were not as available. And I was told at the time that we were talking about teachers, that any resident of Virgins gets to do that for free.
Yeah.
They were unwilling to.
Expanded,
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
Did we know this kind of wave was gonna happen? Because it was, like, I knew you knew for teachers because you were dealing with it in the spring, but it seemed like the wave of volunteers was kind of.
So we didn't do it right in the past. We didn't really have a person that oversaw it. We had a couple of people who processed the situation. So what this did for me is it illuminated the vast number of volunteers that we actually have in our schools that I had no idea about. So it was larger because.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing.
Has everybody been able to be taken care of at this point? Like, I know there were some issues with.
Yes, there were some issues early on, and I think we've worked out the bugs. And I think one of the most important steps is that the administrative assistants at the buildings are going to manage this now. We process it, but they manage it because that's the first entree and introduction to the volunteers.
More hands-on. person-friendly. and
Person-friendly.
And uniform
And
across the
uniform.
district.
And we're being
Right.
compliant.
And
we're
compliant.
in
Which our
compliance.
sister district wasn't.
Right.
And,
Right.
and that's why they got a grant in order to support that work, and we were not able to get that grant.
Because we have been in compliance.
We have been in, right, mostly,
This year.
this year.
I did hear there were certain, or maybe PTOs willing to reimburse some volunteers for their fingerprinting.
And Friends of Music was also discussing it, so.
So, just FYI
Good.
on that.
That'd be nice.
Yes, I know. So I do know that's why you're here, Beth. Did you want to say something?
I do. I was here to ask the board maybe if they would reconsider or change the policy as it is because I felt that to ask people who are taxpayers also, but outside of the police district, to pay $35. And I was thinking it was annually. I was thinking it was going to be every year, but
No,
now
it's
every
just-
3 years. To
Unless
It's
there's
just
continuous,
once.
right, I
Right?
see.
But even
If
the
it's
fingerprinting
continuous-
is just, I think even the fingerprinting is just once.
It's just once. It's if you stop being affiliated and you come back, then the fingerprints are destroyed after 2 years, I believe. So then you have to be re-fingerprinted. But if you're there every year and signing up as a volunteer continuously,
Then
Fingerprints
you
are
can-
destroyed after 3.
3 years, okay.
Okay, so then.
But then you don't need to redo it if you're
As long as you've
involved
been
every year.
continuous.
Right.
And so is the board thinking of, and I overheard some wonderful things that the board may be considering to help those people
Right.
who consider coaching, because not only just setting up the appointments and taking time out of their day to do that, to have asked some people to pay and other taxpayers not, just doesn't sound fair.
Right, right. I mean, unfortunately, who's charged and who's not charged is out of our hands because it's not taxes to the school district that's covering it, it's taxes to the police department that's covering that process. But whether the board wants to recommend putting some funding in, or if it's something that might be able to be handled through PTOs or friends of, other parent groups. But I mean, certainly, we very much appreciate people who come into our schools and volunteer. And it's so meaningful to our students and to our education system. And we don't want to discourage people from doing that because they have to jump through a bunch of hoops and pay money to do that. So it is a discussion that we want to have to make sure that that continues and that it's not a hardship for people to do that, for sure. Yes.
Can we put that on the agenda to discuss the possibility of, or to very seriously consider the board putting a line item in for reimbursement of that fee? Because
Right.
from the perspective of, at least from the Community Engagement Committee, despite the fact that it's out of our hands who has to pay directly and who doesn't, it is ultimately a disincentive to participate.
Absolutely.
And we
Right.
really don't want that. So, so finding a way that volunteers can be volunteers without also having to pay cash for it
Right.
would be wonderful.
Right, yeah, no, and I think, I mean, I don't know that needs to be an action item, that can just be guidance when we do the budget guidance next month.
Okay.
November 13th, provide
Yeah.
guidance to the administration about it.
Okay. Well, that's,
And do we know numbers? Like,
Yeah,
do we
that's what I
know
was
numbers of volunteers?
I'd have to collect that
Yeah.
data for you,
I mean, we wouldn't necessarily need to figure that out, we would just say, we would like this to be included.
Figure out what happens, so in
And-
January, you can bring us the
Right.
first round.
Yeah.
And say,
right.
what it cost.
I don't know how many, I don't have a snapshot of how many volunteers we have, but my instinct is that it's going to be less significant for the district to cover those costs than it is on a per capita basis for each volunteer, relative
And
cost wise.
certainly, people would still have the option to pay it themselves if they preferred.
Yeah, of course. Of course, and yeah, ongoing developing a relationship with Virgins PD is another option. There's other options we can pursue.
Anything else for Joanne before I have just a couple things for Elizabeth? Okay. So since this is the first month that we've gotten the revenue budget to actual, would you mind just talking us through like one line item of how this actually flows for people who may not be familiar? Like I'm actually looking at the local property taxes line.
Yep. So that one is actually, so when you guys develop your budgets, you're coming up with how much state support you need. Now, that state support is a combined support between the education fund and your local property taxes. So when you're budgeting, you're kind of backing into what's all of our expenditures we plan on having in our budget. You're subtracting out any other local revenues, and then the end number is your education fund, local fund support. How much of that comes in taxes versus the education fund gets determined kind of at a later date. So you don't generally build that into your budget. So that's why you see the large number down under general state support grant, but you don't see anything budgeted under that local property taxes number, because you guys aren't breaking that in your budgets. But when the money actually physically comes into your district, some of it's coming in as actual property taxes from your towns. And so when that happens is those tax payments come in, they show up as revenue in that actual year-to-date column. And
So
what I did
year-to-date, we've
here,
gotten 2 million in local
yes.
property taxes. Yep.
And what I'm doing is in that anticipated column is I'm backing that out and bringing it back down to where your budget number is. I'm not taking it, see, as you can see, budget variance is all the way over to the end and it's saying zero,
Right.
even though you had zero budget. I'm moving it down for you and including it down under that general state support so you can really see what the difference is in that line. That's what
Sorry.
I'm actually
Okay, got it.
doing.
Thank you.
Which line is that?
So
Couple,
if
like
you're
3
kind of
lines down.
comparing the local property taxes to the general state support grant, and if you look all the way across, you can see I'm counter adjusting just so that all of it brings it back into that line where you actually budgeted it.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
In reading this, the numbers in parentheses under general state support grant, am I to understand that we're operating with an $87,000 less than we should be? Like, does that mean our expenses are lower or our income is lower?
It's actually, what it's doing is it is showing up as you receiving $87,000 less in either taxes or general state aid support in the current fiscal year for that particular line. And that's probably based on something submitted to the budget people at the state of Vermont and how the numbers change between when you originally create your budget and when you submit your final budget to them in June of the following fiscal year. But overall, your general revenues are not going to be low by 87,000. It's that one particular line item.
The grand total is low by 3,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is noise.
And now that's also an estimate, because those anticipated numbers, those are based on some Agency of Education calculations, which are pretty accurate. You know, at the beginning of the year, we can figure those out. Some of it's based on us taking historical data from your schools and saying, what, in the last 3 years, how much did they earn in interest or whatever? So I'm making an educated estimate and putting it in that anticipated line. And so each month when I run these for you, I'm actually going to be evaluating every single one of those numbers and trying to determine whether I feel that estimate is still adequate for that month and cumulative. And if I make an adjustment, I'll be giving notes to you guys as I give you the financial statements to tell you why that number has changed.
So most of these are really noise. I mean, they're very just small, except for the SPED numbers.
The
and
SPED.
So, the SPED. So I
Yep.
wonder if you could explain why those are so.
When I looked at your budget, I'm curious about that myself. I'm looking at the budget as it was published in your annual book. And under the mainstream block grant line, there was a substantial more budgeted under that line. Your budget published was very summarized. And so it's hard to determine from that what was considered in what makes up that number. Your mainstream block grant is calculated by the Agency of Education. You didn't get that much money last year, so it doesn't really make sense to me why it was budgeted as 722. But on the flip side, when I looked at your overall special ed expenditures and what was budgeted there to receive in revenue, you were actually in the opposite direction more. And so somehow between those two numbers and the calculation that was done manually on the budget side, something was confused between that mainstream block grant. Mainstream block grant is actually something that the state of Vermont gives you, and then the local special education dollars have to match that by a third. And so basically, something in that calculation must have been amiss, but ultimately, you're still gonna get the revenue, it's just in a different pot of money. But both for special ed.
So there's a few things on
Okay.
here that are called grant, but these are not, we have other grants that are not on here. These are grants
Exactly.
that are within the general fund?
Yes.
Is that, okay,
Yes.
all right. All right. And what's the VISBIT refund?
VISBIT refund. So VISBIT refund can be a couple of different things. There is VISBIT refunds that come in from insurance where they're actually giving you back some money because of, say, the VHI Path program, where they're, calculating how much your wellness program is and they're giving you back some money. Generally, those would be in another grant account, not in your general fund. These are actual insurance proceeds. If you see the slash there, these are actual insurance proceeds coming in from claims this year. So like the high school flood is probably exactly what that one is.
Got it. Okay. Did
Elizabeth,
it-
what's the miscellaneous local income? I'm just curious.
Miscellaneous local income is generally anything that comes in. A lot of times people don't budget for those. I'm actually impressed to see that you guys did budget for them because you're paying attention to those kind of miscellaneous things that do come in every single year and kind of keeping track of the average of how much of that actually equates to. It can be anything. Some people tend to lump things like facility rental and things like that into there. As you can see, you've got no budget in facility rental, but you've actually got some coming in. So some of it is those kinds of things. It can be anything that just came into your district that was completely unexpected. If someone gives you some kind of donation and says, I want you to spend this on textbooks, $500, it falls into that category. They didn't really put it into a grant fund. They didn't give it to the PTO, they gave it to you. Those kind of things can fall into there.
And we're really expecting $11,000.
Historically, it looks like that's, when I did a comparison of all, like 3 years and all the districts, because I have to look on every single one of them in order to see your real history.
All right,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, cool. I have one other question, sorry. On the expense side, Direct Instruction Technical Center, is that just not encumbered? And I guess my broader question is, how far along are we in encumbering percentage-wise, what do you think?
So
at
if
this
you
point?
look at the bottom line of your entire report, you'll see that from last month to this month, you dropped by about a half. So we have encumbered a ton of stuff since the last time you guys saw an expense report. This one, the direct instruction under 1568 is definitely one that needs to be encumbered. What that is there is two pieces to your tech center instruction program. You will receive a bill somewhere in around November from the actual tech center where we'll have to pay that. That's probably only about half of that encumbrance line. The other half is a due to, due from. It's a state of Vermont thing where they basically send you a statement that says book this as expense and as revenue, and the combined total of that nets out to zero for you. They're paying that payment on behalf for your school district to the tech center, but either way, we do need to encumber the entire line once we can confirm exactly what the amount's going to be. So that's actually in my notes that I had for myself that October, it will be encumbered.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. And there is other things. We did the support staff teachers, the support staff agreement has been fully encumbered, all the changes. There are retroactive pays. There has been some other adjustments based on coding and things that we have seen. We encumbered all those bond payments and the interest. This round, we encumbered the transportation contract. So there's some huge dollars that made up that difference between last month and this month.
Awesome, thank you. Question?
What does it mean, encumber?
Okay, encumbered means we know the expense is coming. We haven't received a bill yet for the entire amount. And so we are reserving it in that encumbrances column that you see in your financial report, basically saying this is the amount of bills you are going to receive by the time your year ends and you will have had to pay. So that you're basically reserving that money so that you don't overspend your budget lines.
Ah, okay, thank you.
George?
I just want to make a comment to Elizabeth. I can't grasp how you can have such a total understanding of this budget and all of the lines and figures. And it is so nice to have that information flow. I want to thank you very much and congratulate you for the efficiency with which you're executing your office.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anything else for Elizabeth?
Yes.
Yes.
Attitude,
Though-
I have one more.
Though I certainly echo. Go ahead and I'll.
I'm just like, still trying to figure out, like, why there's 2711, transportation to and from school, on page 4, page
Versus
3,
what?
and page 2.
Okay. So one thing that I was requested was to try and see if I could find a way to separate the different funds. Your actual voted on budget has 3 different funds that roll into it.
Okay.
You have your regular general fund. They're all considered general fund as far as an audit is concerned or as
Yes.
far as your budget is concerned, but there's 3 separate funds. There's your general fund, which is 001. There is your special ed fund, which is 050. And there is your early ed fund, which is 004. So those 3 funds make up your general fund budget, and they are reported separately. You could have that function code of 2711 in all 3 places, because you're going to have some transportation for your general ed, for your special ed, and possibly for your pre-K. So basically, that's why you're seeing those 3 numbers.
Okay.
The system is showing all of your general fund first, and then your special ed, and then your early ed. Last time, when I ran it, it combined everything, and it was really hard to see the subtotals. They were in there. There was subtotals for each fund in there, but it was really hard to see at the bottom of each section. This time, the only way, I attempted to find a way to either bold those subtitles or put lines in. This program will not allow me to alter anything about these reports, except for that I was able to, this time, run you separate page breaks when you got to the new fund. So if you'll notice, your first 2 pages are all general fund, and the general fund is totaled at the bottom of that
Yeah.
second page.
Yeah, I see it now.
Page 3
Oh.
has the next fund, and page 4 has the fund after that.
So the-
And then the grand total is at the bottom.
So then on this is the last page with the special ed, that 050 line that's 4.8 million
Yep.
is the
Just
sum
special ed.
total of
Page
1200 to 2711.
Yes.
So the
that
subtotal is the subtitle
Yes.
of each of these reports.
Yep.
Yes,
That's where it shows up.
yes. So it's the general fund and then preschool and then special ed
Cool.
Yep.
and then a grand.
So that was one of my questions
Okay,
too.
great.
The other question, when you have the revised budget, when is that from? Like, is that kind of an ongoing thing? Was there a particular moment when you, so,
Definitely an ongoing thing. And what I did here is you've got your adopted budget, and then you have what's called that amendments column.
Right.
Anytime we see something, there's been times where we've noticed that something is being paid in a line different than where it was budgeted. And there's always that determination of, is that because it's being paid in the wrong place? Or is that because it was budgeted in not the best place? And so when we find that, we book an amendment to your original budget. And then that amendment is what's adjusting and making this revised budget column. It's not really any official given time. We're doing that on an ongoing basis and
right,
just
so
trying to
that's just
really
gonna keep
make it
changing
clear.
as time
It
goes
will.
on, yeah, okay.
Yep. And as long as the bottom line always matches the 2 columns,
It's all good.
You're good.
So amendments
So
just
watch me now.
reflect things shuttling from one line item to the other, which
Yes.
is why the amendment column should always total out to 0, right?
exactly,
Okay.
yes.
Anything else for Elizabeth?
No, but I think I have one more comment. I don't want to belabor it right now, but I think, and this may be just me speaking for myself. No, I am speaking for myself. There is one, page 3 is about the preschool program. And that's about $1.2 million of a budget that we're responsible for. And I would just say as a comment that I don't know much about that program as a board member, and I'm not sure exactly what my role is in determining standards, hiring, all of those kinds of things that $1.2 million and are spent on. And I would just make that a comment here.
Is it 1.2? I see 644,000.
Yeah.
That's the total?
Of the pre-K,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, I was adding it up.
No, the
You were-
bottom line is the
Oh,
total.
04 is
Adopted
that total.
budget.
Okay.
Adopted
You were
budget is
doubling it.
645.
You doubled it, yeah.
It's,
But,
Yeah.
it's still a fairly substantial amount
Yep.
of money, even
Yes.
though it's
Right.
only
Definitely.
half of
Yep.
what.
right.
I was just making sure I was looking at the right page.
So, and normally we do get some information from Kara.
She will when we do the presentation of the
Right.
programs.
Right.
Yeah, and it's all part of the same budgeting process with
Right.
the same timeline. It's all done at the same time.
Well, this is all getting kind of messy with how Department of Ed, or Agency of Ed is dealing with the new act and what they're willing to pay and what is a 5-year-old. And
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
personal experience with that.
Exactly.
I know,
Right.
Mark.
very personal experience.
Here's
I have a
about it,
wife
yeah.
who has very strong
Yeah, a
feelings
little
about
bit
what
is out of our hands.
super, directors do.
So, John, hopefully your questions can be answered when Kara does her presentation.
That'd be great.
Again, if you have questions, just forward them to Joanne and Lori, and I will be happy to make sure I cover them.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Just one
Yes.
last question. Is there any reason for us to know what the amendments are about that you're making? I mean, or what they're related to? Like, where is it coming? Where is it going? Why
Yeah,
is it
so
different?
individually, I know that when I enter them into the accounting software, there is a place where I can put notes, and I'm definitely putting a note in there saying, took this from this line and put it here, and here's the reason, and my initials are attached to it.
Okay.
Those notes don't print on the financial reports, but we definitely can reference them or look them up for anyone who wants to know why, so by all means, like if you see a large dollar amount in one particular area,
Yeah.
going to and from, we can look those up individually. My guess is that because you're seeing these reports in such a summarized format by the function code, that a lot of these are probably
Like a bunch of
multiple
different-
little line items
Right.
moving here and there,
Right.
and not one individual amount.
Right. Because there is a financial policy around line
The dollar
item.
threshold and
Yeah.
the line
Yes.
item.
Right, right.
For being able to do those internal adjustments, yeah.
Exactly, yes.
The,
So if it was big enough, we would.
Okay.
we
You would get a
know.
report. When we give you the expenditure report, we have news and notes, and you'll get an explanation for the changes that we're making.
Right.
Great.
George?
when you're building the new budget, though, you're taking all of those previous changes into account so that we
That's
won't
the
have to
idea.
make those adjustments next year.
Exactly, so we're gonna go from our revised budget column and go from there, yeah, definitely.
All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to principals' reports. Anyone have any questions or comments on the principals' reports?
Thank you for having the same format.
Yeah.
Oh, did that work?
Yeah.
Good.
Good luck on the dunking.
Oh, I saw the video. That was fantastic. Well, first of all, a plug, if you're not following the district's Facebook page, you really should, because there's a lot of cool stuff, including a nice shot of Travis going in the dunk.
Were you wearing a suit?
He was. I did love the suit.
You were wearing a good suit? Oh.
But that was fantastic. The kids were just beyond excited to see you get wet.
Punish them. Now that you're out of the tank.
Anything else for the principals?
I just wanted to say to Stephanie and Jay, I'm super excited about a school newspaper for the high school. And is it going to be printed? Is it electronic?
It's mostly electronic. We're printing the premiere issue.
Yeah.
But we're having some trouble printing it because it's either printing very, very small or very, very large, and it's 4 pages. So it's being addressed by someone else right now, and
Yeah.
I don't exactly know where we stand, but it'll be linked to the website.
Okay.
Yeah, this student came to me a year ago and proposed it, and I
Yeah.
said, basically, I'll do whatever I can to facilitate this. And I
Awesome.
figured she'd just, drop away like
Yeah.
so many of them do, and she didn't. She ended the year, she said, here's what I'm doing, and we started the year, and all of a sudden, we have a student newspaper.
That's
And
great.
We're not censoring them.
Yep, great.
There are a couple faculty members that are editing their work for,
Yeah.
gum.
Yeah.
And I didn't see, I mean, there might have been a couple things that I might have, wordsmithed a bit, but it's student work, but, I assured her, and I talked to the 2 faculty members that are doing that, and we are not gonna censor them.
Yeah.
This is student
Great.
voice. So, I trust, just like we don't read the valedictorian speeches before graduation. I really believe that our students have a good sense about what's appropriate, and I think they're waking up, and our students are developing their voice and looking around and seeing what's wrong and right with the world and commenting on it. And I've been waiting for this, so it's very exciting.
Me too. I'm really excited about it. Any chance that they would publish it in the newspaper? I know that Mount A publishes theirs, and I believe Middlebury does, like maybe twice or.
In the Addison Independent, you mean?
What
Yeah.
you're asking.
In the Addison Independent.
That they would print like a bifold or something within the Addison Independent. that would
Mount
be-
Abe and I believe Middlebury
does, yeah.
prints their student newsletter. It's an insert in the paper at least 2 to 3 times a year.
Well, I don't have a budget to produce this
Yeah, I don't know if
paper
they-
right now,
yeah.
so.
I don't know if they pay for it or
We're using them some
not,
old
but-
paper that we have, and that.
Oh, nice.
So, remember the old big paper, Matt? Yeah.
Great.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, to
Cool.
the idea of trusting the students, the fact that you gave them the morning last Wednesday to have that assembly was good. I was in the back of the room, and they got up there and in the course of 30 minutes said what needed to be said, that we would have sat around for 7 meetings deciding how it was going to be done and how it might go and what's going to
No
happen
kidding.
here. They knew what to say and they knew how to talk to each other, and it was really impressive.
Maybe I should join that committee.
Good.
You're too old, man.
I was
All
just
right.
going to say, they are not going to talk to you.
That's what you think.
You are over the hill.
I just have one addition. We didn't have the number. There were 19 students selected for National Honor Society. That wasn't finalized when I had to write my.
Awesome. And how many had applied?
31 had applied. So, and I think there are 10 existing members, so that would be 29. It's a big group.
Nice. Awesome. Okay. So we do have a submitted student report. Mason's not here, but he gave us some nice information. Hopefully he'll
Might
be
have
here.
went on a college tour, you know, it's
Yeah.
a long weekend.
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's true.
But I think, I think Stephanie and I will have a conversation about making sure that he notifies us, so
Right.
that we know, we know that he knows where the location is, and if he's not gonna be there, we should know that.
My report, I just wanted to congratulate Lori, but she's actually not feeling well. She's not here, but she's going to be a representative on the VSBA board, which is pretty cool, and we'll have a direct link for information from that board, which will be nice to have. And the other thing is that down in action items, we're going to be giving some direction about our board's representative vote, our vote, at the VSBA annual meeting, which Diana and Lori are going to go to. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look through those proposed resolutions and the bylaw change. Are there any questions about those before we take a vote on it later? You have a question?
Shouldn't I discuss it during the discussion period, or is now the time?
We can discuss it during the discussion period.
Okay.
That is all I have. So, Community Engagement Committee report.
Okay, so, we rolled out the vision statement at each school, with varied results. Harrisburg did a really good job. They had an ice cream social, so. No one showed up in Addison, no one showed up in Virgins Elementary School. 11 people showed up at the high school.
No one came to the open houses?
No one, oh no, they came to the open houses, they didn't come out to the vision rollout.
Where were you guys? Weren't you there?
Yeah, but, no, I was not there.
Oh, ahead of time. I see.
We were supposed, yeah, they didn't come between 5:30 and 6, and we didn't.
I did not know.
Yes, it was. Matt, it was in the newsletter twice.
It was in the newsletter.
First thing.
It was. There was
Matt did his job.
There were conflicting events happening at the same time.
Maybe the newsletter
Right.
should be printed on ice cream.
Well, I think the ice cream was very key.
Right. It's against wellness, too much
Well, and a
sugar.
couple people came in the high school and they thought it was for something else, so. But then they were stuck.
Okay.
And I also have to
Okay.
thank Beth was very, very vocal, and she was drumming up people to to respond to it. So she was really great about that.
Yeah. So anyway, it gives us good data. We need to talk about it a little bit more. We had a meeting, we discussed ways to roll out the vision statement to students. I sent a communication to Joanne, who sent it on to the principals. We really did not want to dictate how it happened in each school. There was a lot of discussion about that, especially from the teachers and Travis, about kind of really making it part of their language and turning it into iMessages, and Travis really wants banners, vinyl banners for each school. And that we really needed to use a multi-pronged approach. We also made it very clear that we are not the communications committee, and I think that there's a little confusion on the board that I've heard board members say, oh, well, maybe the communications committee should handle that. We're not going to be giving messages to the community about budgets and things like that. That's not really what community engagement is. We are going to have a workshop with Sue McCormick sometime end of November, maybe beginning of December, to really help us establish long-range goals, because there really seems to be a lot we could take on. One of the issues is school choice. There's an issue of mission statements, value statements. Should we be dealing with that? Development of school councils. I will let everyone know when the date for that workshop is, and other board members are welcome to come. Anything that I missed? That was all from our minutes, so.
Thank you.
Oh, and also, we are going to be considering possibly expanding committee membership at our meeting next week. So, to include possibly parents and maybe more.
Cool.
That's us.
All right.
Livestock.
Any updates from policy committee?
We met on October 9th, and our next meeting will be on November 2nd. So even though it's taken a while to meet, we regrouped on our goals, and we are still on track to meet the work plan that we set out. And so during this meeting on October 9th, we discussed, we spent a good bit of time trying to get ourselves organized and think about the nature of student transfer and school choice here in this district. And that will be ongoing, and we expect that we will have more information for the next board meeting, and we expect that we will have a policy to be reviewed by the full board by December 11th. I think that's one. I mean, we have to get it done by then.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to have it in place for the next school year. Right. And then the last thing that we did today is that, given the events of the weekend, last week, we reviewed and will consider a policy. We will consider a policy in our normal process that addresses school crisis prevention and responses. And so there'll be more on that as well down the road.
Cool. Thank you. Facilities committee, anything?
We met on Friday. We are continuing our conversation about the preliminary proposal put forward for the energy performance contract. It was a very productive meeting. There were some questions that we wanted to send back to the people about the next steps, and there were some problems we had with their proposal, but I'm assuming that these are getting resolved in the course of time. So I think for me it was very helpful to see on the superintendent's report that 2020 is when that large bond expires, and so that gives us a very clear time frame about when the next kind of big bond, not big bond, but the next time that we can be talking about some of the larger issues.
More flexibility.
That gives us more flexibility, that's right. So we're trying to make sure we get the process right in terms of both energy and non-energy issues, and so that takes a lot of conversation.
Right. Cool.
We're having that conversation. The back stairs are also ongoing, which is about as far as I think that is an ongoing discussion and process, and I don't think there's anything to report at this point.
Great. Finance Committee,
I guess me.
okay.
Since I did the bills this month. I did review our random bills over the course of 2 days last week because I ran out of time the first day. Found a couple of minor errors with signatures not being in the right place and a question about an electric bill that was not paid 1 month, and we're all caught up this month, but Elizabeth's going to check on what happened there. But other than that, everything seems like processes in place, structure is happening, things that are supposed to have POs are done in the right way.
So your process for reviewing the bills and director's orders is working and everyone's happy?
The way we're doing it, picking 10 checks at random, and then also anything that catch your eye, and in my case, I thought anything that was over $2,500, I would look at specifically, which was a lot more than I thought.
2,500? Wow.
That was a lot more
That
than
was
my
ambitious.
10, so I just kept going, but I'd already done it, so, but then trying to figure out, so I came across a lot of the pre-K payments, because they're going in chunks, so a number of my questions to Elizabeth were me learning, rather than there was a problem, going, what's this? She goes, oh, it's because of such and such. Oh, okay.
All right, cool. And anything else besides that process going on in the facility?
No, we will meet
Or, I
again,
mean,
but I don't think we
finance?
have a date set right now.
Okay. All right. Superintendent Evaluation Committee, let's see, we also met on October 9th. Things are moving right along.
And the previous date as well. I mean, we've
We
met
did,
twice.
we met on September 27th, I
Yeah.
believe, as well. Yep, so we've had a couple meetings. At the November board meeting, we will be bringing to the board an updated job description for the superintendent position. We will also have some goals that have been developed for the superintendent for 17-18 year. And we will also have an executive session that night to review the results of the superintendent's evaluation, which is nearing completion.
It is.
It's basically complete. We just need to go through it with the full board. And also we will discuss a timeline for moving forward to ensure that we're on track. Did I forget anything?
Checking in 6 months,
We'll talk
no, we
about that
haven't
next
done
time. Okay. All right. How's it at Hannaford?
Hey, let's see. So they had their open house in mid-September, like everybody else did. Their adult tech ed classes have started. The teachers signed and ratified their contract, which they were super excited about.
Awesome.
I think I mentioned last time they're establishing a community engagement committee down there as well. They're in the very early stages.
Are you going to join that?
No, I have to draw the line somewhere. Yeah, no, I don't think I can do another committee. So, but I did offer to share some of our work with them. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss their board meeting on Wednesday because I have another commitment, so I won't be there this month. And let's see, I saw Stephanie shared the link for their newsletter, which I highly recommend taking a peek at. It highlights a couple of the different programs that they offer. And one of the things that came up in discussion at the last board meeting was the fact that they have enrolled in the morning program about 200-ish, or that might be not completely accurate, around 200 students, and then the afternoon program only has 70 students. So they're really trying to, that's one of their goals, is to try and sort of remedy that situation. So anyway, that's all.
Is the problem that they want to have it more balanced, or they need more people in the afternoon?
Either or, I think. I mean, they'd like as many students there as they could get.
Right.
I think, yeah. But it's definitely not very well balanced, 70 in the afternoon and a larger number in the morning. Yep. That's it.
Great, thank you. All right, that brings us up to the action items. So I will take a motion to approve minutes.
So moved.
Second.
You need a little more specificity.
I move that we approve the minutes from September 11th, 2017.
Thank you.
Second.
Any changes or questions about those?
Just saying that I really liked Glory sending those out to us ahead of time so we could edit it beforehand, so we didn't have to go through all that here.
Right.
Thank you.
Plus, it was the meeting, I could still remember the meeting, too.
Right,
When
exactly.
I read them. That was nice. All right, so all in favor of accepting those minutes?
Aye.
Bills and directors' orders?
Do we have that
Do we have a motion?
number?
Do you have the number?
So the amount is $1,851,191.84.
Move to approve the amount just stated?
Second.
And I think you kind of already told us that process went well this month, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And the proposed resolutions and bylaw changes. Let's start with the motion to, let's start with the motion.
I move that we vote to approve the VSBA proposed resolutions and bylaw changes.
Second.
All right, so conversation?
I have a quick question about that, because I did not read the second link, and I wonder if somebody could summarize for my personal benefit
The second.
the proposed resolutions, the group's ideas about cost containment and innovation zones.
Where are those little books that I handed out? You have one of those?
Mark
Here's one.
has one down there. I've got one, mine's right here.
Ah,
Okay, here you go.
all right.
Do you want
I've got one on both sides. That's great.
That
So
actually
that's
was one.
proposal
So-
2, so it's these.
Okay.
Are we?
I don't know, that was my question.
Right, yeah.
So what we're looking for is just guidance to Diana on how to place our board's vote at the VSBA annual meeting,
Right.
whether we are in support of these ideas.
So one of them is that they want to move negotiations for health insurance to the state level for teachers.
Oh, okay.
Again, these are ideas
2.
that the VSBA folks will try to work with the legislature to move towards.
Got it. So we are voting whether or not the VSBA should advocate for these things.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Well
whether or
said.
not state level negotiations, that's a good question.
So that's,
So
that's-
Sue and I went to the regional meeting, so we saw a presentation on this. So a point was made that if we were able to shift our adult staff to student ratio, that if every single district shifted it 1 to 5, that we would save, that $175 million annually would be saved
Shifted the
statewide.
ratio.
statewide.
What does that mean to shift it 1 to 5?
Well, so we got an email from the state
Rebecca
linking
Volkel.
us to our ratios, and they're wildly various. So,
I'm in the process of verifying those right now. I just haven't, I've only had the
Right,
memo for
so
2 days.
Yeah.
they're recommending a shift of a ratio from 1 to 5. What does that mean?
well, right now, it's 1 adult for every 4.23 students, and they were saying if it's 1 adult to every 5 students, it would be $175 million.
So they're
I
taking
don't-
every adult in the school and not just teachers.
Right,
Correct.
custodians, bus,
Every
well, I don't know
adult
if bus
employed.
drivers,
Every adult employed by the district.
right.
So in some districts,
And
it
we
could
don't
be
employ bus
contracted, in some
drivers.
districts, it could be people who are driving buses are counted.
That seems
Right.
like a remarkably
Right.
coarse assessment of what the adult to student ratio would actually entail in terms of outcomes. They're counting bus drivers?
No, not cutting bus, no.
It seems to me
Staff,
like
or
it
could
would be
be.
a lot more accurate if they were talking teacher to student ratios. I mean, you've got to have a janitor, you have to have a maintenance person. There isn't any connection between that staff and the education staff. It should be teacher to student is the ratio they ought to be looking at. And that obviously is higher by what, double?
The teacher to student, what was it, 1 to 12, something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah,
More than
Right.
double.
more than double.
So, I mean, I feel like Joanne could give us some guidance on this. They want to establish a task force, so they're not They're not
Yeah.
advocating for it,
Okay.
but they're just
Right.
saying,
To study it.
right, to
All
study
right.
it. And I don't think it's really so much about class size. I mean, some of it might be.
Kara, did you have something?
So this came out of, if you don't mind me speaking, is Vermont has way more support staff than the rest of the nation. So a lot of this is looking at and analyzing the way we use support staff in both special ed and general ed practices.
Okay.
So the state's taking a really hard look at how we're using that staff, why we have so much more support staff than the rest of the nation. And that's really throwing our numbers because that's
Okay.
really what's affecting that 1 to 4.8 ratio.
Understood.
So the third one,
So I mean, personally, I think creating a task force to look at it,
Yes.
Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
yeah. And then, the third one is a study of state-funded retirement buyout that conditions rehires on achieving ratios.
again, it's a study, so.
But the problem with that one is that the whereas for number 2 is exactly the same as the whereas for number 3. So we don't actually have a description of what this, we have, the be resolved is
Yeah.
is different, but the
Oh.
whereas is,
The whereas. I wonder if you go back in that book, there's a.
Okay.
There's a slideshow that they gave.
Mm-hmm. Where does the,
We're also the third lowest paid teachers in New England, which is interesting.
yeah.
Out of how many?
how many states are in New England?
4 or 5?
6,
I don't know,
so we're right in the middle.
5 or 6.
Third lowest, but also.
Third highest.
Third high,
New York is
Yeah.
New York doesn't
not-
count.
no.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
The 6.
Yeah, 6.
So, these commissions that we're voting on,
Compared that to cost, there'd be something interesting.
these task forces and studies, where does the funding come from?
Well, we pay, we're a member of the VSBA, so we pay membership fee. Every district pays a membership fee to the VSBA
Okay,
annually.
all right,
So it comes
From us.
From us.
all right.
Um,
Right.
And establishing standards for fact finders in the collective bargaining process.
So what was pointed out is that the fact finders, when you go to, is it, Arbor, you can probably speak about this better than I can. When you go to when you reach impasse and you go to fact finding, oftentimes fact finders go around and find out what neighboring districts have settled on, and that kind of
Right.
becomes the big item.
Right, parity.
Right.
Yeah, and they feel that it's too narrow, the comparables are too narrow, that they need to be looking at the community's ability to pay, what are the salaries, you know, what are the median incomes in the community, that more needs to be included in that fact-finding besides just what other teachers
I see.
are making surrounding the district, so.
Okay.
And I think there was one,
And so that's another sort of process recommendation where they're
Yeah,
gonna look
they-
at what the standards might be and recommend that to legislature.
Here's a
Right.
couple of things that you ought to look at.
Yeah, okay.
And then I don't quite,
Vermont,
do you
and then
understand
you
this
will go
reserve
over
funds?
here at median
so
household
there
income
are
and
some
work down.
schools in Vermont that actually have reserve, like, large reserve funds. I mean, we're not one of them.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And so, and/or, budget surpluses. And they're looking at, basically, the VSBA is looking at advocating for some guidelines around how those funds could be used because they feel that those guidelines might be coming and they want to advocate in ways that would be favorable to school districts. Right. So all of these ideas came from the VSBA board committee that met to come up and brainstorm ideas that they thought might help with cost containment throughout the state and ways that they could, ideas that they could pose to the legislature and hopefully that would be favorable to school districts instead of potentially legislature coming up with other ideas that might be less favorable. That's
Okay.
That's the idea here.
Okay.
So-
If you're looking for guidance from board members,
Yeah.
then I would advocate that you vote yes on proposal 2, the first one, and that I think I would vote pass or in abstention or something on the second one.
Wait, which one's the
What are you
first, which
referring
one's
to?
the
The
first?
second one about
Ratios?
cost containment?
So.
Because there's
so
some
you're-
parts that I
are you
would
saying the
vote for.
innovation
There
zone?
are some parts that I'm
No.
frankly uncertain about enough that I wouldn't vote for.
We
So
don't know which ones
proposal
you're referring
one-
to.
Proposal 1 being the innovation zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
And proposal 2, I would
Cost containment.
vote,
There's all pieces. There's
what is it?
there's 5 sections to proposal 2.
I am
The 5 sections that we
abstaining.
just went
I would
through.
abstain. That's just, that
So
is
you're
feedback
going to
from
use
one
our
person.
one vote to abstain.
I would.
What do other
Okay.
people feel?
Any other thoughts? So we have, there's basically 3 things. There's the innovation zone, there's the cost containment ideas, and then there's a one edit to the bylaw, which would allow for people to participate in their meetings and vote through electronic means. Those are the 3.
Oh,
Buckets.
I'd vote yes on that one.
Yeah.
I would support all 3.
All right, so we have some in support of all, some in support of some.
But there's more than 3. There's 5, right?
There's
No,
5
this is-
within
This is
2.
within this, all of these are part of this.
Or part of 2?
Proposal 2, yeah.
So we don't get to pick around in proposal
No.
2?
No, I
No,
think
we would
it's,
have to.
Oh, those clever people. That's how they get
It's-
you.
it's innovation zone, cost containment, bylaw change.
John, would it be worth pointing out which ones you're concerned about, or which?
Yeah, I think the healthcare one.
Yes, that's
I'm
extremely
not
contentious.
uncertain about the nature of that, given who owns the budget. I have enough questions about that I would not vote for that. And I'm also frankly disappointed a little bit in the cost containment effort by the VSBA last time because it lost us money. And I would like for them to do better.
I do think.
RETN, I would like for them to do better.
I think that this is their attempt at
attempt to
doing
do
better
better.
and being more transparent.
Right. I'm a little bit, I don't know, maybe this is procedural, but their bundling of these 5 pretty diverse and different items, especially, I don't like the way that is tacked in there.
That's the way I understood it. Is that the way you
It-
understood
if-
it, that it's gonna be?
Particularly because most of these are sort of fact-finding research, which is I totally support, except for pesky little item 1, which is actually a recommendation, which is set. They're not, item number 1 is not study the statewide health insurance, study the feasibility or the cost savings of statewide health insurance benefit for school employees. They're just saying, no, we're gonna make this recommendation. And I'm very ambivalent about that. I don't know, I've heard a lot of opinion on both sides about whether health insurance benefits should be negotiated at the local or state level. I certainly welcome not having to go through that personally, but I'm not sure that whether that's an abdication of our responsibility as a locally appointed board. So I'm really in favor of sub-items 2 through 5 on the section 2, but I'm really ambivalent about number 1 specifically.
I believe that if they are going to go to a state negotiated health care, then the state needs to be paying the cost. It shouldn't be coming out of our budget when we have absolutely no control over it.
That also
Cost
makes
of
sense to me.
healthcare.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So,
I hear you.
I mean, if they're gonna be the big guys on the block and make this agreement, then they're the ones that should be paying for it. They shouldn't be coming back to our budget to get the money.
Lori, do you have any thoughts?
I'm with John.
You're with John. So you're abstaining. So
As
we
opposed to
wouldn't
voting
vote
no?
it down. We wouldn't vote no, we would just abstain.
What do you think, Mark? You're, as a negotiator? Oh, God.
Oh, dear.
I told you I don't like having paper.
I would go with yes on all of them. I'm not happy with all of them, but in the lump sum, I think, especially with the task force, I'm with those. And 2.1 is not gonna go anywhere in the legislature, so they can put their thumbs up and say we'd like that and get some pressure, but it's not gonna pass. It's gonna be years before anything of this nature happens. They've crashed and burned so many times in this past 8 months that everyone is gonna be gun shy for a while. So I'm not.
So you're
concerned
thinking
that
it's
this is-
politically expedient to vote yes and
Well, if
feel
we wanna
confident?
try
that-
and contain healthcare, I think that the yes vote kinda helps, but I don't think that state is gonna take it over in 6 months.
All right, so you're yes across the board. We've got a yes and an abstain, a couple of them.
I don't know.
How about over here? Tom?
I'll vote yes.
Across the board? Christina?
I don't know.
Okay.
We've got these critical
There-
thinkers
I
from
mean,
Ferrisburg here.
there's definitely parts
What
that
said
I
last
don't
there
feel
by
comfortable.
Mark was fine. I think we could vote for it all, because I don't think the first one's gonna happen.
All right.
Even though I don't like that one, and if they could separate that one out, that would be ideal.
Well, so, I mean, hopefully there'll be discussion, and I think that we can let
Right.
them know that we're not happy with one.
Yeah.
That would be ideal.
Okay. All right.
I don't feel that they've done enough to demonstrate that that's actually a good idea. And I think that they would have no problem passing section 2 if they separated that out.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion was that we would, support, that we would support them all? Is that the motion? The motion, okay.
That was what I moved, yeah, actually.
Yes,
It was,
okay.
wasn't it?
Do
Can-
you want to amend the motion?
Do we want an
and go
amendment,
one
or,
by one?
or do we want to vote on that motion?
I think they're gonna, this board probably would advocate for yes across, but I hope guidance. Would you please voice
Yeah.
that we have some serious concerns about
Yes.
Yeah.
section
Will
2?
do.
You know,
do I need
I will
to-
say too that, Diane and I went to the regional meeting, and the purpose of the regional meeting was for us to give feedback on this. And so I would encourage everyone to try to come to those when they have, it's only once a year. And they truly were looking for feedback. They also, the VSBA accepts resolutions from boards. So if we have ideas, we can send them to them.
Do I need to amend the movement in order to make sure that we include in the discussion period our comments on item number 2?
I think
I
you've
mean, we're just
expressed
giving
that.
guidance
Yeah,
to
you've
Diana
expressed
to
that
bring
to
to the
Diana.
meeting, so I think,
Okay.
Yell
It's
at them
all
for us, Diane.
on record.
I'll try.
We'll make that
Well,
motion
no, you know who
separately.
will do it? Lori will do it. She'll do a really good job.
So, okay, so in that case, I will not amend
Okay,
unless
Okay.
someone wants me to.
all right, so we are ready to take a vote then.
Yep.
So all in favor of supporting these proposals at the VSBA meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Can I abstain? Even though I made
Abstain.
the
Yes,
movement?
we can, any abstain?
John and
I
I.
abstain.
No, me too.
Wait,
Lori.
can you raise your hands if
Lori,
you're
John,
abstaining?
and Finn are abstaining.
So 3 abstaining,
7 saying yes.
That's good.
Okay.
That's fine.
so that is,
Just fine.
It's okay.
And,
that is a
7 out of
majority.
12 is-
and
Well,
Sue, you can talk to Nicole too, between now and then.
I think our vote is suggestive of that
Yeah.
you can say, we vote for, we approve of these, but there was enough concern that it was not unanimous among our board.
Right.
That's
Right.
message.
So you got all that, Diana?
I got it all.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thank you
Do
for
you have all
going.
that, Glory?
To you and Lori. Okay,
We're 3 minutes behind.
discussion items, next meeting agenda items. Do we need to discuss those?
No.
Okay,
Nope.
we will discuss them next meeting. So we need to go into executive session for a personnel matter. If someone would like to make a
I
motion.
move that we enter into executive session for a personnel matter
Second.
and invite the superintendent.
And is there anything
Is-
happening after that, or we just adjourn? Just want to give the
We're-
public, and
There is adjournment after that.
so there's no other,
That's
No
all
other
that's on the
business.
agenda, yeah. So did we get a second?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you,
I'm gonna need
public.
it to turn this in.